Welcome to the Love, Sex, and Leadership podcast, where you can discover simple tantric teachings to embody your true power, awaken your soul's wisdom, and live an inspired life as a natural, intuitive, and heart-centered leader. Well, welcome everyone. We are here to discuss gratitude, to discuss embodiment. This is a whole series I'm doing with a lot of amazing individuals, and I have the honor and pleasure to have Dr. DeMartini here with me, who's been a huge mentor really early on in my waking up journey. He came into my life and really I started to understand how to work with my mind so I could actually get into my body. And when I was writing this book, The Embodied Man, I reached out and I was very grateful to receive his loving endorsement and appreciation. And today we get to dive into really what is gratitude. And there's a lot I know we could talk about for hours, and I probably won't introduce you the same way that I feel like you could, but just share a few words about who you are and really also like the aspect of what gratitude means, and we'll dive right into this.
Well, I'm an educator. I have been educating over 49 years now.
Wow.
And I research and write, travel and teach, and anything to do with human behavior, particularly maximizing human potential and awareness. And that's what I love doing. And I really believe that gratitude is one of the most significant things a human being can embrace as a daily ritual, a daily action. I write my gratitude responses every single day. I have probably the largest collection of anybody you'll ever meet. And I was born on Thanksgiving Day, so that's probably a factor. And Thanksgiving was just a couple weeks ago where I hit my 67th birthday. So
Wow.
I love doing that. And the executive center in the forebrain, which is the medial prefrontal cortex, which is the most advanced part of the brain for self-mastery, is also called the gratitude center, because people who are living by highest priority and living with deep meaning and fulfillment, doing what they really love doing, learning to delegate lower priority things to others who love doing that, have the most gratitude and fulfillment in life. So I think that self-mastery and gratitude are inseparable.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I heard many of your stories at times, and the thing I want to dive into here even deeper is around where does gratitude play into the place where the mind can begin to let go, or if that's even possible, and where the deeper place of the heart can open, because one of the big premises of this book is supporting male bodies to really do their best to get out of their mind a bit more and into their heart. Because I feel like when my own experience, when I'm vibrating more from my heart and I can experience gratitude, then I'm living life in more alignment to my purpose and my mission. And I'd just love to hear what your perspective is on that, of really like, how do we get out of here and actually feel life more from the vibration of our heart?
That's a good question. There's a thing called analysis and synthesis. Analysis is breaking things down. Synthesis is integrating them. And the forebrain is a synthesis area, and the amygdala is more of a avoid pain, seek pleasure, a separation, that's a lysis, analysis. And one is the forebrain and one's towards the hindbrain. When we judge somebody and infatuate with somebody and put them on a pedestal and are conscious of their upsides and unconscious of their downsides, we tend to minimize ourselves and become more conscious of our downsides and unconscious of our upsides. And that's an inauthentic state of self-minimization and aggrandizement of them. So we're exaggerating them, minimizing ourselves. When we look down on somebody and resent them and are conscious of their downside and unconscious of their upside, we tend to exaggerate ourselves and are now conscious of our upside and unconscious of our downside. So we're too proud to admit what we see in them is inside us, or too humble to admit what we see in them is inside us. And we're not being authentic whenever we're judging. So every time we judge another human being, we're really judging ourselves too by minimizing or exaggerating ourselves. And we don't have a state of equanimity within ourselves. We don't have a state of equity between them and us when we judge. And when we judge, if we infatuate, we get a dopamine rush, and we sometimes confuse that with love. And we think that's an open heart, but it's just a dopamine rush. And when we resent somebody, we also have a testosterone and norepinephrine rush, because these are fight or flight and rest and digest kind of responses of our amygdala. When we actually see both sides simultaneous, and we're mindful and fully conscious, and we don't have to exaggerate or minimize ourselves, but we're actually being ourselves, not our personas and masks and facades, but our authentic self. We're now in a state of equanimity within us and equity between ourselves and others. And we have now a sustainable, fair exchange relationship. And in that state where we don't exaggerate or minimize, which occupies our mind, because we infatuate, it occupies space and time in our mind and runs us. If we resent, it occupies space and time in our mind and runs us. But when we love, our mind is freed. And a perfectly equilibrated mind, and I've done this on maybe a couple 100,000 people, a perfectly equilibrated mind, if you ask the right questions and equilibrate the mind perfectly, the heart opens. So you transcend the judging mind that is analyzing and judging, and synthesize those two pairs in a perfect equilibrium, and the heart opens every time. So a perfectly equilibrated mind opens the heart. That's why equanimity and objectivity and mindfulness is a present state where if we're judging, we're exaggerating ourselves narcissistically looking down, or minimizing ourselves altruistically looking up, and sacrificing for others or sacrificing others for us. And all that noise in the brain is a feedback, a response to let us know we're not being authentic. Every symptom in our life is a feedback to let us know when we're not authentic. In our business, our social life, our relationships, our health, our psychology, everything is a feedback to get us into a state of real appreciation and real love for ourselves and other people. It's almost like a homeostatic feedback system to try to maximize our potential. Our body and our mind is attempting to help us do. But we sometimes get caught in moral hypocrisies and trapped by these incomplete awarenesses that shut our heart off and make us analyze instead of synthesize.
It's almost like we're built with the right software to know how to handle this, but the conditioning and
we're programmed. But we subordinate to mothers, fathers, preachers, teachers, conventions, traditions, and mores of moral hypocrisies by those that have projected their value system onto society as a controlling mechanism for people who are disempowered enough to believe in it, instead of believing their own internal knowing. And I always say that when the voice and the vision on the inside is louder than all those opinions on the outside, you begin to master your life, and the authentic you is the most powerful you. That's where you have the most. You can't have love and intimacy as long as you're too proud or too humble to admit what you see in others inside you. You don't have a mirror reflector. You only have mirror reflection when you see that the seer, the seeing, and the seen are the same. When you can actually realize that hero and villain in them is you. You know, it's all you, and it's just they're there to point out what you're not loving in you and giving you an opportunity to love that part of you, so you can love them for helping you love yourself.
To come back actually into who you really are at the end of the day.
Really who you are.
Yeah.
And the moment you're there, tears of gratitude are confirmations of your authentic self.
Yeah.
That's why gratitude is so significant.
I can speak first person. I remember the first time I came to your breakthrough experience, and I had the person in front of me, not the actual physical form, but the individual had so much anger and animosity and hatred towards, and I just had that moment with gratitude, and I was like, wow, there's something shifting in my neurology in this moment that changed forever.
You do have a shift in neurology, because the areas of your brain that are now active are self-governed by the forebrain. And people confuse, forebrain with, analysis, but that's not where the real analysis is. It's actually decision-making based on instincts and impulses that are breaking things down into parts instead of integrating into whole. You're more gestalt when you have a balanced mind. That's why in the method I taught in the breakthrough experience, I'm asking you questions to make you conscious of the unconscious parts. If you're resenting somebody, you're conscious of the downside. You're unconscious of the upside. What are the upsides? When the upsides completely balance the downsides, the resentment's gone. And the same with the infatuation. And people confuse infatuation with love. And they actually are addicted with an impulse to somebody and dependent on them and fearing the loss of them. And that doesn't open the heart. What opens the heart is when you realize you have no fear of loss of that which you seek and no fear of gain of that which you avoid. You're just present. That's when your heart opens.
Beautiful. I want to speak a little bit more deeply into trauma because, I worked a lot in a field where sexuality is alive in conversations and people bring their healing trauma and they're diving into the wounds around their base and activating more of who they are. And, there's a lot of different schools of thought. I feel like a lot of what you're already speaking about here is addressing different pieces and caveats of trauma. But to somebody who really has that like armor on their heart and they maybe have been wounded and they've been, something's happened to them in their past and they're like, how do I ever get through that? And how do I actually like show up with an open heart? Because there's all this stuff in the way. Like, I'd love to hear a bit more breaking down like the essence of trauma, not just again individuals, but I also feel it on a societal level. It's something that people are almost afraid of. Ooh, they're in their trauma. Like, whoa, I gotta walk on eggshells a little bit here,
Okay, what I'm going to say is probably going to shock everybody, but I might as well just go for it because I find it a waste of time to pussyfoot around something. There is no such thing as trauma until the individual chooses to subjectively bias their experience and refuse to be aware of all the parts. Because the mind is set up with a memory and anti-memory. Anytime you believe that something outside you caused you something, you've already got an illusion. It has nothing to do with what happens out there. It's your perception of it. If I came to you right now and I took your hand and I put it on a table and I slammed it with a hammer, you go, what? You'd probably cuss because it releases endorphins. You'd probably scream at me and you'd drive me and you just smash my thumb. What's wrong with you? And you'd think that's immediately would be a bad thing because your association is what good in that? What's the good in that, right? You'd say bad, trauma, tragedy, you'd associate with that. Well, what if I came up to you and said, I'm going to give you $1 billion cash and a night with your favorite movie star female. And you'll be the genie, whatever you decide they do. Or maybe you've got a girlfriend that you prefer. You put the girl there because I could be getting you in the doghouse here. But if I said, I'm going to give you $1 billion cash and I have a surgeon that will repair your thumb perfectly in less than 8 days, it'll be perfectly normal. I'll smash your thumb, but you got $1 billion cash plus the night with the chick or your girlfriend or whatever to do whatever you want. It's your harem, your individual harem. Okay, if I gave you that, would you put your thumb out there for a smash for $1 billion cash?
I'd give it a good smash.
Okay, now, what happens now with that? What happens now with the thumb? Is that a trauma or is that an absolute wow? Okay, so now, it's not what happens to you. It's the associations you put with it. I've taken people through unimaginable things. I have. You've seen it in Breakthrough.
For sure.
I've taken people through unimaginable things that they think is terrible, trauma, tragedy, torture. I mean, amazing stuff. And there's nothing the mortal body can experience that the mortal soul can't love. But it's about asking the right questions and make you conscious of information you're unconscious of when you judged it in the first place. Because as long as you're causal and you're blaming something on the outside for the cause of things, that means that you're basically assuming there's a drawback without a benefit, and you're the one responsible for that perception. Just because 100 people might agree with you doesn't mean it's true.
Mhm.
It just means that that's what they might agree with because they don't know the benefits.
Mhm. Mhm.
I had a guy recently who was kidnapped on the freeway in Africa, driving down the freeway, 4 cars pull up around him, stop, bang out the windows, undo the car, grab him, cover him in a head sack, stick him in a trunk, and drove him 5 to 6 hours into a place of nowhere land, and then ransomed his family for large sums of money because he had wealth.
Hmm.
He'd been under trauma,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So somebody referred him to me, and I smiled, and he wanted to run the story. I said, okay, stop the story. Running this story is only going to dramatize and neuroplastically run the amygdala and make you dramatize it and run the story, and you're not going to get worse. So stop the story.
Mhm.
I don't really care about the story. Now, go to that moment when this occurred. What was the benefit?
Hmm.
He said, well, there is no benefit. How can there be benefit? Be accountable. What's the benefit? He goes, I don't see a benefit. What's the benefit?
Uh-huh.
Well, how can there be? What's the benefit? And all of a sudden he said, I'm closer to my family than I've ever been in the history of my family.
Mm.
My wife is giving me more focused attention, and I now don't take my kids for granted. And he started to cry,
Mm.
teary-eyed.
Mm.
He got a broken tear. He goes, I don't take my kids for granted. He goes, unbelievable. I was a work man. Work. Since that's happened, I'm now close to my family.
Wow.
Good. Yeah. What's the next benefit? And all of a sudden he goes, man, I've never asked this question. This is months of therapy and tragedy. And no one's asked me this question. What's the benefit? What's the next benefit? He goes, I was gone for 6 weeks. My company boomed. People rose to the occasion and took over roles and jobs that I normally rob them of. And I'm making passive income. I'm not even at work. And they were now making me money. And they didn't even want me to come back because they want me to be with my family.
Mm-hmm.
And it forced me to delegate, and the people stepped up. And I was robbing them of those accountabilities and undermining my business and working my butt off. And now I'm making more money, and I'm more time with the family, and now respecting the people and giving them more fees and making more income.
Mm-hmm.
I said, how much of a consulting, if you had to pay a consultant to get you to that? He says, I paid consultants. Like, they couldn't get me there. I wouldn't let it go.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It was forced to let it go. How much is that worth? He goes, millions.
Mm.
Millions. I said, how much did they ransom? 10? I said, what's another benefit?
Mm.
He said, I was working, wasn't eating well, and had hypertension at a young age. My blood pressure's back down. I'm doing yoga with my wife. He says, my health is returned. What's that worth? He goes, I don't even know. On longevity, I don't know. It's a hard one to put a value on, but it's worth a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I said, what's another benefit? He said, my father and mother were a bit estranged because of who I married.
Mm.
When they found out that I was kidnapped, I reestablished my relationship with my mom and dad.
Mm.
And now they're there for my grandkids. It's a dream come true. Never would have thought that would have happened. But my dad, whatever we had a major issue with, it's gone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because he realized he might have lost his son. He said, that's worth a lot.
Yeah.
He said, I've got more time to meditate and think. I'm actually now more visionary in my business. I've now got a more quality team. It says, I now find out who my real friends are.
Mm-hmm.
And I started listening. Keep going, buddy. Keep going. What's another benefit? And all of a sudden, the trauma perceptions are shifting.
Mm.
And he hit this threshold, he cried.
Mm.
And he said, right now, he's fully aware that prior to this event, in his mind, he felt trapped because he couldn't figure out how to juggle his family and his work.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I even prayed for something to get me past this. Right now, I actually feel grateful for these people. I feel like it was a prayer answered.
Mm. Mm.
He said, right now, I almost feel like thanking those guys.
Mm.
I said, great. Because anything you can't say thank you for with gratitude is baggage.
Mm.
Anything you can say thank you for is fuel.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're not traumatized in your perception, are you? He goes, no. I just want to go home and tell my wife this. I want them to know this. 2 hours I spent with this guy and made him ask a question and made him conscious of the unconscious and found the terrific and the terrible, the blessings and the curse, you know, and the anti-memory that was there. Then I made him go in there and I said, at the moment, when you were actually in the car and you were wanting to pee and you couldn't urinate and you were holding it for these hours and you were sitting there and you were not knowing what was going to happen and wondering if you were going to be killed and didn't know what was happening, go to that moment. And he says, I can tell you exactly where my mind was. I have an absolutely vivid imagery of every memory of my family. I said, can you see that those were joyful moments in your mind as you were having sorrow and terror? And he goes, there's a thing called dissociative freeze response that the second we have a perception of terror, we dissociate it, create a counterbalancing anti-memory in the brain to neutralize that, to keep homeostasis in the brain. The brain will do it. And if you become aware of both of them, it no longer causes trauma. It's just an event. All events are neutral until somebody subjectively biases and puts a artificially injected social label on something. So when I got through with him, he said, I can't believe that I don't even have a trauma in my mind now. I said, no, it never was. You chose to make it because you got surrounded by people that can't imagine the upsides of such an event. I held you accountable, that's all. Bring the balance sheet in the mind, make you mindful, not just mindless. When you're unconscious and ignorant, you have missing information, you have entropy, you age. When you see the fullness, you're engaged, not aged. And I basically made him, and he went home, and I got a beautiful letter from the family. And he went home and sat there with the entire family and told the entire reframing of it. Wow. And they all cried together. And so that was now the transformation of the rest of the family that supposedly was traumatized. And one of the kids was having difficulty in school and that just nipped it right there once he shared that experience. So trauma is not something that happens to us. Trauma is what we choose to make it. And we can turn it into an opportunity. It's just like Viktor Frankl when he was in the concentration camps, when he extracted meaning, which means to find the conscious, the other side that you're unconscious of, and bringing it back into the mean. When Aristotle said that there were vices, he said there were excellent deficiencies of perception that were the vices. And when we balance out the perception, we have the mean, there's the virtue. And it was the poised, temperate virtue, the moderate perception that was the virtue. And that's extracting meaning out of your existential existence. And so if you ask the right questions, you can liberate yourself from these illusions of terrifics and terribles. Because some people get caught in a fantasy and think something's terrific and are blind to the downsides just as much as the other. I've seen people I saw a woman go into 4 relationships called Mike that were alcoholics because she was resenting her father, who was Mike and an alcoholic. 4 relationships she was in. And she didn't see the downsides. And I made her look at the downsides and extract the meaning out of it. And then she started giggling and she goes, all these relationships are trying to get me to love my dad. And I said, bang. So let's go clear the dad. And that was the end of the mics. Those things you thought they had downsides. Everything has 2 sides. If you really want to open your heart, you see both sides simultaneously. Wilhelm Wundt, one of the earliest psychologists, but even The father of psychology, they called him the co-father of psychology. He said there's simultaneous contrast and sequential contrast. Sequential contrast is when you see a positive without a negative or a negative without a positive, and they're separated and they're analyzed, broken. But if you see them simultaneously and look for the other side, not sequentially, but simultaneously, you're liberated and the heart opens. And that's when therapy is no longer causal. It's acausal, as Carl Jung says. It's synchronous, and it liberates. And it is a confirmation that we're now back in authenticity, not looking down or up at people. We're loving, appreciating the magnificence of why these things happen in our life. We're finding the hidden order to our chaos.
True power of gratitude. Very well said. One last thing before we close. You mentioned soul earlier in the last chapter of my book, The Embodied Man is Awakening Soul Purpose. And I'd love for you to just link the place of where gratitude and embodied gratitude and feeling, as you said, the tears of gratitude. And I love that you said that, because I worked a lot with the emotional body. When tears are there, it's like you really know the emotional body is present. But where does this embodied gratitude open up the gateway to the soul? Like where is that transition in place where we can be in the soul?
Each of us have a set of priorities that we live our life by, set of values, things most to least important. Anytime we fill our day with the highest priority action that is most inspiring, most fulfilling, that we spontaneously love doing, mine's teaching. The moment we do, the blood glucose and oxygen goes in the forebrain, and we have a higher probability of objectivity. Objectivity means neutral-minded, whole-minded, wholeness. And we go into our executive center, and the executive center has nerve fibers that go down to the amygdala and calm down the impulses and instincts that distract us with judgment. And in that state, that objectivity state awakens the gratitude. That's why that center, the executive center, is the gratitude center. It's the self-mastery executive gratitude center. It's sometimes called the gratitude center. And we have grace because we no longer are judging, and we no longer have a desire looking up to people, wanting to change us into them, and no longer looking down, wanting to change them into us. There's nothing to change. When there's absolutely no desire to change us relative to others or others relative to us, and we see as it is, the way it is, and we're grateful for as it is, human will matches what used to be in theological language, divine will. And now we're in a state of grace, and our heart opens. And by definition, we're not judging. That's the state of unconditional love, soul, the authentic self. The essential state is not the existential personas. It's the essential soul. It's the actual that Aristotle described instead of the potential part. We're now actualizing our life, self-actualizing it. So when we live by our highest values, Aristotle called that the telos, the end in mind. We're now living not as a means to an end, but in the end in mind. We're now present with what we feel we're called to do in our life. And we're fulfilling our soul's purpose, the most meaningful and purposeful thing we can do, the telos. And that's when we're in the most unconditional love. So the purpose, the soul, and the gratitude are inseparable. I like to say there's transcendentals. Immanuel Kant described it as the transcendentals: gratitude, love, inspiration, enthusiasm, certainty, and presence. We're present. We're unwavering and certain that we love. We're in a state of gratitude. We're loving. We're enthused in our body, which means the God within, and we're inspired. That's the authentic self. That's the soul. That's what our life is designed to be. And we're capable of living it if we prioritize our life. I don't do anything but teach, research, and write. Everything else is delegated. If we delegate lower priority things and we're not having to engage in anything that is uninspiring, we can have a very grateful life on a daily basis. It's totally self-actualizable. The most people live by duty, not design. They don't structure their life by priority. They feel like, oh my God, what will people think? And I got to fit in, and I got to do this, and I should do this. And they're living in imperatives instead of indicatives. And that's about prioritization. That's why I try to help people find out what they really value and prioritize their life and give themselves permission to shine, doing what's really meaningful, that contributes the most, that's really inspiring to them.
Well, I thank you. I thank you for the mission that you do on this life, and really the way you showed up. I mean, the time that you came into my life as a young man has made such a massive impact, and I'm so deeply grateful. And I know the thousands and thousands of people around the world that you've impacted, and I feel more than anything that you do that. You follow what's alive, and you give permission for other people to do the same. You gave me a huge permission field for that, and so much for my mind to absorb so that I could actually feel the depth of my heart. And from my heart to yours, thank you, brother. Thank you for fulfilling and doing the mission you're doing on this planet. It means the world to me, and I know many of the people listening all over the planet right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to be with you, and for the great questions and the time to talk about a very important question called gratitude. I think that's a very important topic.
And if people want to find you, they go to DeMartiniInstitute.com, or where's the best place?
Just DrDeMartini.com.
Perfect.
Dr. DeMartini, DrDeMartini.com, DrDeMartini.com. They can go and do their value determination there, or they can just go on and they could spend the rest of their life just trying to review everything that's on there. It's it's a wealth of information there.
I will raise my hand to that one. I know any course, I feel like I've been digesting it for years after, so I'm still digesting it. There's a wealth of information. I've never met someone actually that has more information. So I honor that so much. Thank you for who you are, and it's been such a pleasure to have you here with us today.
No, thank you. Thanks for having me.